orders. If I like, I order twice. Hibachi, got the gravy on the rice. Rolling in Mexico.
Pittsburgh Steeler fans, what is happening in Steeler Nation? Oh man, we're so excited the music's going again. I do this all the time. You guys know me well. Welcome in to the Steelers Q&A. And man, do we have some stuff to talk about. Big things happening in Steeler Nation finally. And what luck that we get to talk about it. The first ones for the network, the Steel Curtain Network here live on YouTube. And to talk it over with me is the terrific trio that we make of Andrew Wilbar and Corey Eckenroth. Welcome in, boys. This is crazy. DK Metcalf is a Pittsburgh Steeler for a second-round pick and a whole lot of money. And then the Steelers, I think, are getting a 6th-round pick back for a 7th-round pick. So making things happen. This is what we've been looking for. Initial reactions. Andrew, I'll let you go first, man. How you feeling about this trade?
Well, my initial reaction was somewhat delayed. So I'm in church, right? And my phone is on vibrate the whole time. And the entire service, my pocket is just vibrating like my leg is about to go numb from all the vibration going on in our Slack channel. Everyone's going nuts, losing their mind. Yeah. So I finally get out of church and I see this. I'm like, this is absolutely incredible. And you've got to love it, right? For the biggest reason, I would say the 2nd-round pick. This is in I would almost go to the level of saying that it's historically weak draft class. This is not a great draft class. The best receiver you're getting in that 2nd round is something that's unproven, a whole lot less unproven, a whole lot more unproven than DK Metcalf. And even if you don't get what you want for George Pickens, nobody's making you trade him as of right now, unless George Pickens decides that he's going to be traded. Why not have both of them? Let Pickens play out for a contract year, prove his worth to the rest of the NFL. You got 2 great receivers. If you can trade them, you obviously got something back in return for him, and it really compensates you back for what you lost in the Metcalf trade.
Absolutely. Corey, how about you? How you feeling about this one?
I love the signing. Being able to get him for a 2nd-round pick. I'm going to, share Andrew's sentiment to be able to get a 2nd-round pick and for a proven receiver like this. Usually 2nd-round picks, most of the time they'll pan out. They'll be decent contributors. But this, getting a DK Metcalf type of player for a 2nd-round pick, I make that trade every day and twice on Sunday. It was kind of nice that it came down when it did, maybe a little more than an hour ago. I was on my way home from Pennsylvania and I saw the news flashing through the Slack channel as everybody was talking about it. And I yelled out and the kids were like, what's going on? What's going on? And I almost veered off the road as I'm trying to get us home. I was so excited. But, to what Andrew was saying, there was also another rumor that was already floated out there that Pickens may have been traded. But let's talk about this as it is right now. Steelers have 2 number 1 receivers. Yep. When we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, the Steelers definitely needed to look at receiver in the draft, maybe free agency. It was a high priority list item, and they went out and they solved it, didn't they?
They sure did. This is insanity. We were talking about it pre-show. This is the biggest splash the Steelers have made in a trade since Minkah Fitzpatrick. You're talking about Justin Fields last year for the 6th that could be a 4th. That's not blockbuster feeling at all, even though you felt good about, hey, we got a young quarterback that's got some upside coming in. This is an established and young NFL player at a premium position. And I'm looking at tweets. I'm looking at all sorts of social media here. And really, Andrew, we've talked about this a lot on our shows. Andy Weidel and Omar Khan, what are they trying to do here? This looks like how the Eagles build a roster. The A.J. Brown trade from a few years ago. This is the Steelers' version of that. This is a very unique situation that the Steelers find themselves in this year without a quarterback. It's been that way, I guess, now for a few years. So not so unique to Steeler fans, but a unique situation where you're able to still add somebody of his caliber without the quarterback situation figured out. And we were talking about this a little bit pre-show as well. So let's get into it. This kind of feels like the Steelers might have something figured out at quarterback that they're letting DK Metcalf in on a little bit in order to sweeten this deal or to make it sound good. Do you guys feel that way about this, Andrew? What do you think?
I would agree. The 2 things that DK Metcalf said he wanted when he went to a new team was to play in warm weather and for there to be stability at the quarterback position. Pittsburgh has neither right now. So my assumption is that they gave him an insight as to what they're doing at quarterback. Now, the one area in which I might find a little bit of discouragement in this news immediately is that my initial reaction is not, oh man, this is signaling the Steelers are going to go and bring back Justin Fields. My first thoughts are either the Steelers go back and get Russell Wilson, who is former teammates with DK Metcalf in Seattle, or the Steelers are completely going all in, trying to win now, and going after an outlandish name like Aaron Rodgers, who I would not necessarily be in favor of either, because the one guy that is out there that has proven that he can play amongst the elite, and he could be the guy that if he played as the Aaron Rodgers of old and kept the antics to a small level, could ideally compete with Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow in the division. That would be the only area in which I'd be a little bit concerned. But the Steelers have to have a plan here. I don't buy the Sam Darnold hype. I could be wrong here. We might be talking about this 24 hours from now, and I'm completely wrong on that. But I do think the Steelers have a plan here. I think that's the only way that the Steelers would have been able to make this deal happen.
Corey, your thoughts on the QB situation? Is this something that the Steelers feel that they've got figured out, and that's how you were able to bring in Metcalf, or is this just money talks and the Steelers were able to pay the most?
Well, with all the cap room that they've got, they know that they've got to start building out this roster, regardless of who the quarterback is. And regardless of who the Steelers trot out there at quarterback, that team has to be complete first, so that when they bring that quarterback in, he's ready to win, regardless of whether he's an elite type passer or he's an above average to not quite elite starter. You can win with those types of quarterbacks, but you've got to have the rest of the team there. Yep. The Steelers are some pieces away with $60 million in cap room. That's obvious. Most of the time the teams have that much cap room, they're typically a lot worse than the Steelers record has shown over the year. So I don't think the Steelers are that far off. Mike Tomlin teams are always overachieving with their talent. So I think that with the right moves and the right holes getting plugged, I don't necessarily think it's going to matter who the quarterback is. So I think that there's actually a really good chance that they can nab Justin Fields in this. And that was part of this process of talking about that, is that they needed DK to make this team more complete.
Good stuff. Let's talk about it from this angle here. The Steelers, Tom Pelissero just tweeted this, okay? The Steelers are sending their 2025 second-round pick to Seattle for DK Metcalf, who is signing a new 5-year, $150 million contract with Pittsburgh. The $33 million new money average makes it the largest deal in franchise history. This is the biggest deal in franchise history. That means bigger than Ben Roethlisberger deals in the past. This is huge money for a wide receiver, and the Steelers felt like they needed it. Let's talk about it from the DK Metcalf and George Pickens already being on the roster angle of this thing, because I'm really intrigued by this. And before we get into that, I should say this is a Q&A show, so listeners, get your questions in here about this trade, about anything you want to, and we will answer those as we talk. But just kind of getting through some of the big talking points of this, my personal opinion on the Steelers' best course of action here is that they should let George Pickens play out his contract in 2025 with the team and have both receivers. I know you've got now two big-bodied receivers that play on the outside, but they play a different style of ball. I don't think DK Metcalf is necessarily the jump ball specialist that George Pickens is. They have a little bit different style there. They're both vertical threats, but DK is more of the run by you vertical threat, the posts and corners vertical threat, work some of the underneath stuff on crossers with his big frame in the middle of the field. George Pickens isn't that. He's more of the finesse player on the outside that gets up after footballs and can be physical at the point of the catch. So two very different receivers. I get that you probably can't pay both of those guys now, but look at what the Cincinnati Bengals did with T. Higgins, and they're going to try to get a contract done with Jamar Chase. Maybe you let George Pickens play out his contract this next year. Maybe the franchise tag is on the option, but for now, you make yourself the best contender that you can by keeping George Pickens on the field. And I think that's what the Steelers want to do, is be a contender in 2025. Now, could they trade Pickens and recoup some draft capital? I think that that's a fantastic idea as well. But if you want the best receiver core you can have for this season, for whatever quarterback you bring in, you want both of those receivers. Andrew, your take on that?
I agree with that. And I mentioned this at the end of the Breaking News podcast with Dave, Brian, and Jeff. And why not, if George Pickens is not going to be a headache, Why not hold on to him now? If something transpires at the beginning of the season, maybe Roman Wilson finally emerges and he becomes a dependable number 2. You have somebody else there, and the offense, it can function without a George Pickens, and you can still get a decent pick for him. Maybe a top receiver on a top team goes down. Maybe a team like Kansas City or somebody like that, they have an injury. Rashee Rice goes down again, or Xavier Worthy gets hurt, and they are dead set on maintaining their AFC North, the AFC crown. Maybe you trade him to a team like that, the trade deadline, and you get a 2026 pick. Because I'll be perfectly honest, I would much rather have a 2026 pick than a 2025 pick. You look at the early implications of next year's draft and 2027, by the way. I would take a 2027 second if somebody were to offer the Steelers that for George Pickens more than I would a 2025 second. And I know that value is supposed to depreciate if you're trading a pick a couple years in advance, but I'd be willing to wait for that because I know the draft prospects the Steelers are going to be able to get are going to be much better than what they can get in the second round this year. So I would rather get a higher pick in a future year than settle for a mid-round pick this year in a draft that's really not that great.
What'd you think, Corey?
I think that Emeka Egbuka is probably off the first round list right about now. But I will say this much. I think the Steelers do need to continue looking at adding talent to this roster at the wide receiver position because it was so thin at the end of the last year. Having DK Metcalf in the room, while having a star receiver in the room does help, this team was still way short on talent when it came to having a second wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3 that was reliable. And to maximize the talent of not only these two guys, like Andrew was saying, but to start to build some depth in that receiver room so that if one of them were to go down due to injury or if Pickens were to get traded, we've got some decent talent to back that up and we don't really lose a step on offense, so to speak. I think the Steelers are still trying to figure out who they are on offense. So I think that all the talent that they can get and amass right now is going to help.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those situations where you can see both sides of the coin for the Steelers. And Andrew, I liked your comment about trying to push for draft picks in a future year, maybe going into the season with both guys on the roster and see what happens down the road. There's a way that the Steelers can do business here where they can remain a contender in 2025 and they can also prep for the future. And I think that no matter what they do at quarterback this year, it's pretty obvious to me that they're going to be in that market again next year, outside of one dark horse thing that I'm going to throw in here in just a little bit that I want to get y'all's reaction to, because we don't know what's going on with the quarterback situation. Nothing for sure, right? Justin Fields still on the table. Sam Darnold, somebody on X made a good point. It was Chase Daniel on X made a good point. Why would Sam Darnold want to go to Seattle now after Seattle's done with Lockett, done with DK Metcalf? Why not go to Pittsburgh? If he's smart, he would want to go where the receivers are, right?
Maybe he wants to be back with Davante Adams.
Yeah, right. Maybe he does want to go back with Davante Adams. Maybe. I don't know. Well, Adams, let's see. Didn't Adams go to the Rams, right? Adams is with the Rams now.
That's right. He did go to the Rams. I apologize.
Yep.
I was thinking of a different trade.
That's okay. So, I think George Pickens for now, as a member of this team, this is a very dangerous receiving group. And what do you do at quarterback now? Andrew, let's go ahead and just throw it to you. What is your quarterback plan if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers?
If I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm bringing back Justin Fields. I think that he is the best combination of upside and affordability without drama. Justin Fields, that's one thing you don't have to worry about with him, despite all the negativity that surrounded him in Chicago. And even to an extent, some of the negativity that he faced when he first came to Pittsburgh and having to fight out with Russell Wilson, and end up in the end getting benched in favor of Russell Wilson. He has always remained quiet about anything. He was done an injustice in Chicago. He had to learn a new offense every single year, and he had to do the same thing this year when he came to Pittsburgh. But did you ever hear Justin Fields complain about anything? He remained completely quiet about it. I mean, even when he was brought into Pittsburgh, he's like, I'm coming here to try to win the job, and that's what he did. But when the Steelers benched him in favor of Russell Wilson, you didn't hear him going on social media or making weird videos about, how he's been done an injustice by the team or the team promised him this or promised him that. No, he stayed quiet about it. And he kept putting himself in position to, until his injury, be ready to be that guy if he was ever called upon again. So I think his maturity, his leadership, and the fact that I don't think, he's not going to be cheap. I think he does have a market, but I don't think he's going to, he's not going to be a guy that's going to reset the market. You're not going to have to pay him probably the same amount that you'd have to pay an Aaron Rodgers to come in and play for you, who I think has a lot more question marks. To me, Justin Fields makes the most sense because you at least have that hidden upside with his rushing ability. Maybe on a good day, he could potentially outdo a Joe Burrow or a Lamar Jackson and get you somewhere in the playoffs.
Corey, your take?
I know I don't want Aaron Rodgers, so I think Justin Fields does present a lot of upside for the Steelers. There was a lot of rumors going around whether he would want to come back to the Steelers. I think that having DK probably helps him want to come back to the Steelers, but ultimately, I wouldn't want somebody like Sam Darnold either. I mentioned in the Slack channel earlier that him coming to the Vikings and doing well for 1 year, coming to the Pittsburgh offense, would it look the same? Would the offense look the same? Would Darnold be able to get it like he did by going to the Vikings? Are they looking to trying to capture, lightning in a bottle twice in 2 seasons? And if he's able to do that, does that make him, expendable? Does that make him a journeyman just like it did with Ryan Fitzpatrick?
Yeah.
He was so good at picking up offenses that every team would end up signing him as a backup. And if that's Sam Darnold's legacy, I would rather have Justin Fields, who has more upside, who has a future, who has the tools to be better than just a career backup. Yeah.
And let's not take away now the fact that the attractiveness of the Pittsburgh offense to a potential quarterback now too. If I'm Justin Fields and I'm looking between Jets and Steelers, to me, the Steelers are now the more attractive offense to be a part of, with Arthur Smith there leading the way and with these 2 receivers there. You have Garrett Wilson over in New York, and that's a former teammate of Justin Fields at Ohio State. So I see the pull there. But if the money can be matched pretty closely, why not bring him back? Andrew, looks like you got something to say.
Yeah, did you guys just see this tweet that just dropped from Ian Rappaport? Steelers expect to sign Russell Wilson 3 years, $90 million.
Really?
I'm just joking. We're not reporting that. I just thought I'd throw it out there just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
I'm not reporting news. This is not of the opinions of Steel Curtain Network or Fans for Sports Network. That is just thought I'd throw that out there, give you a little scare. Anyways, sorry.
Goodness. You can't do that to us, Andrew. I hope the comments light you up. Oh, they are. Yeah, that's a fireable offense.
Love
John
it.
Fireable offense. We are done. That might be the greatest moment on this show. I'm gonna have to say, Andrew, thank you for that. All right. Here, just throwing out crazy stuff. All right. What if the Steelers trade for Kyler Murray? What if the Steelers trade with the Arizona Cardinals for Kyler Murray and get an established quarterback to go this route as well? What do you think? Andrew, give me a response.
I'll take that over Russell Wilson signing 3 years, $90 million. It would come down to draft compensation more than anything. I'm not so much worried about the contract, but it's the draft compensation. Are you having to give up a first and a second, multiple firsts? Like, in what year are you trading it? Again, this year, as bad as it sounds, even though the Steelers don't have a second round pick currently, I would rather trade this year's first than next year's first. I want to maintain that draft capital for next year and then 2027 as well. So it would all depend on when you're giving the draft capital up and how much of it. It's so hard to tell what the market value would be for Kyler Murray. I have a sense, just with how desperate teams are for quarterbacks right now, it would be pretty high. It would be probably a couple first round picks, considering he's still relatively young. And as you got teams at the top that'd be willing to give. I mean, could you imagine what the Giants would do to get a guy like Kyler Murray? I mean, I'd imagine they would be all over that.
Could you imagine what the Giants would do to get a guy like Saquon Barkley?
Yeah, right. Yeah. The Giants would do a lot for anybody good is kind of what the talk is. Now, the Kyler Murray thing to me was just like, if you're going to keep being crazy, that's the only other quarterback that's kind of like an established starter that has maybe top 10, top 12 upside as a quarterback that could become available. I don't see anybody else becoming available, and his contract's not too bad right now, but I don't know. Andrew, you're still getting roasted in the comment section, which is absolutely hilarious to me. I'm personally, if I'm going, if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, I am going Justin Fields as my top option. But I will say this. If you do bring in Sam Darnold, your offense looks different than it did with either Russell Wilson or Justin Fields under center in 2024, because Sam Darnold plays the whole field, and he is not afraid. Well, he might be afraid to, but he will let it go over the middle of the field. He threw a lot of picks in the back half of the season last year, throwing over the middle of the field, but he was attacking it. And I think that, you've got Arthur Smith, who loves to do that. You got the tight end room that looks really good, and now the wide receivers, the big guys that can play on the outside. But George Pickens lined up in the slot a lot last year. I think that he's going to be valuable in that type of role. They've got a lot of slot receivers on this team, so the middle of the field is going to be a place to target, and Darnold will do that more than Fields or Russell Wilson will. So that's my only recommendation when it comes to Darnold. I think the contract isn't worth it for Darnold personally, unless he's going to take less than $20 million this year. But I just don't see that happening. I don't know. I still think Justin Fields, I agree with both of you guys that he is number one option here. Russell Wilson makes a lot of sense, though. Unfortunately, with this signing, it does make a lot of sense to bring back Russ. Andrew's joke, the unintended killer of our psyche here, but it does make sense. Let's go ahead and take a break on the audio side. If you're listening live, we're not going anywhere. Obviously, we're going to keep talking about DK Metcalf. We're going to jump into some of your questions as well. But until for the second half of the show, stay tuned. We will be right back. All right, the second half of the Steelers Q&A is live. Andrew Wilbar, Corey Eckenroth joining myself, Jeremy Betts, to talk about this breaking news trade. The Pittsburgh Steelers adding DK Metcalf. And let's get to some of the questions and comments here that I wanted to bring up. We talked a little bit about this one already. It was asked a while ago. Charlie Y, could the Steelers be thinking of now trading Pickens to recoup their second round pick? That's definitely going to be part of the thought process here. There's some reports out there. John Frashella is already reporting that there's going to be an attractive look at that for the Steelers because you might be able to recoup a draft pick. But I don't know if Pickens would garner a second at this point. We would have to see. If Pickens were traded, as an answer to this question, what do you guys think it would be for? Andrew, you can go first.
That is not an easy question to answer, because now if you're looking at from a league-wide perspective, George Pickens, the Steelers are now probably going to look to trade him, right? They don't need George Pickens. So I don't think that it all depends on how he's perceived around the rest of the league and also how desperate teams get after free agency. I think this is something where free agency may end up playing out first. I don't know that you see an immediate George Pickens move here. I could see a team like New England, if they can't lure in one of the top free agents, they can't lure in a Chris Godwin or whoever they may be targeting in free agency. If they can't get a guy like that, maybe they're willing to part with some draft capital and go after Pickens. But even then, we see in the first round this year how every team has maintained their first round pick. If you go through other rounds of this draft, it's a pretty clean draft board this year. There's not a bunch of teams that are stock loaded with, 15 draft picks where they can just trade a bunch of it off. So it's going to be interesting to see which team is willing to part with it in a year like this, if they're giving up capital this year or if they're willing to part in a future year. It's really difficult. If I had to bet, I would say, knowing Omar Khan, he might be able to muster out a second round pick. Probably not any higher than that. But again, if there's a team out there that feels differently about this draft and next, take advantage of that. If someone offers you a 2026 second and you feel like you're not going to sign him long-term, you take that.
Yeah. Corey?
Wilbar, I'm going to ask you a quick question just to preface all of this. Is this draft is tending to be a receiver-heavy draft, from what I understand. Is that correct?
Are you talking 2026?
This year's draft, 2025.
This year's no. I think you got some of those guys in the late portion of the first round that could be there. Yeah, the top. Yeah, I don't think it's great. I really don't.
Yeah. So with all of that, I would have to say no more than a third. But if I'm Omar Khan, if I'm going to maximize his value, if I'm going to maximize Pickens' value, get the most for him, I need to be as patient as possible and wait until training camp to trade Pickens, because by then the draft dust will settle. Teams that are going to be looking for that, number one compliment, that's when he's going to have the most value. I think that's when the Steelers should look to try to trade him, if they're going to trade him.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. Let's see here. This one I could not gather. George T asks, is the 6th and 7th round pick swap this year? I would assume so, but I guess I don't know for sure. Has anybody seen that for sure? I would assume it's 2025 though.
I'd heard whispers about it, but I didn't hear anything solid.
Because the Steelers don't have a 6th round pick this year. And I think that they would like to have a pick in each round. They don't like to spend a lot of time between picks. And so they had 2 7ths. You take one of those and flip it for a 6th. And now you have a 1st round pick, a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. That feels pretty good. And realizing that your 2nd is DK Metcalf. So I think it's going to be this year, George T. That's what makes sense here. Let's see.
I'm of the belief that Omar Khan's draft strategy should be to get rid of every 6th and 7th round pick for a pick in the earlier rounds. So double up your 7th and 6th for a 5th, or whatever you can do. Get rid of those 6th and 7th round picks.
Yeah, sure. Or go get something next year. That's right. What we've been saying is go get the next year stuff. That makes some sense. All right. Joseph asks, do you think the more weapons they have will make whoever the quarterback or running backs are better? So I'm guessing so defenders can't key on a one-dimensional offense. I think that's a big part of this, is that the Steelers want to be more or less predictable and more dynamic in both aspects of the offense. That's why I wouldn't rule out Andrew's gonna knock somebody out when I say this, or knock something over or break something. I wouldn't rule out the Steelers taking a running back in the 1st round. Because they want some dynamicism back there in the backfield. So it's defensive tackle or running back for me in the 1st round now, and it would have to be the right guy there. If Omarion Hampton is there at 21, it makes a lot of sense for the Steelers. I don't think anybody would kill that, but we'll see.
Round. I think we can get him in the 2nd.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think he's going in the 1st. We'll see.
I think so,
anybody else agree with this take? Do you think the more weapons helps with them being less one-dimensional?
Go ahead, Andrew.
I would agree to an extent. I think the biggest holdup with all this is how much do you trust the Steelers coaching staff? How much do you trust Arthur Smith? How much do you trust Mike Tomlin? How much do you trust the offensive line? Has so much to do with this. We were talking about I know, Jeremy, you'd mentioned the Eagles and how they had built their roster. So much is built in the trenches. And I think the Steelers have done a good job finding talent the past couple of years along the offensive line. But when's that all going to come together? When is Pat Meyer going to when is this scheme finally going to start working? I mean, he's had several years now. It hasn't worked. I was hoping the Steelers would move on this year. They didn't. Can the Steelers become an elite offensive line unit under Pat Meyer? How good can they be this year? I don't know the answer to that. I feel like on a level of talent, maybe you add one extra guy at guard and you've got a really, really good offensive line. So it's so hard to tell. Defensive line, is your point. I would say defensive line would be the way to go in the 1st round. Yeah. I think that if Kenneth Grant is there, he's an excellent pick. You can move Benton to 5 tech, and it gives you a lot more beef up front in the interior of the line. That's just my personal take. I wouldn't rule out corner either, though. At that spot, I think Jedi Barron's probably gone, but there could be some other guys available that could potentially intrigue the Steelers. And I wouldn't even rule out a Jair Alexander trade. The Steelers are willing to trade for a receiver. Why not trade for a corner? I mean, he's not going to garner more than maybe a 5th round pick.
Corey?
I like that Jair Alexander trade. I do like that idea.
Jair for a 5th.
I just don't know if they're going to pull the trigger on that one. I think just having a whole lot more talent on the team, like I was saying earlier, is just going to help all around. Building a solid roster that doesn't have any holes. That way, whenever the quarterback does come in, they're ready to roll. In the 1st round, what I'd like to see the Steelers do is get a defensive tackle. I like Kenneth Grant. Nolan, I think, is the other kid. Is it Mississippi State? Ole Miss. But those 2 guys are monsters. I definitely, if there's no trade for George Pickens, then I could see Steelers passing on receiver in the first round. I wouldn't want them to take a receiver in the first at this point. Anyways, even with the DK trade. Running back in the first, with the way that they're devalued these days, I just can't pull the trigger on it. I mean,
running backs are resurging, Corey. Running backs are back.
Established running backs that can prove their value are resurging.
Okay. No, I don't want to argue that. I don't want to argue about that anymore. Let's.
No, I think that solidly, the Steelers can still get a solid running back in the second round. Any one of those two Ohio State boys are going to be good. They're probably going to be there in the second round, and they'd be great fits in this offense. So either one of those guys would be happy for me, which would allow us Steelers flexibility in the first round to go after the nose tackle or plug that guard spot that Wilbar was talking about. That right guard spot's that's a sore spot right now because typically teams are going to run behind that right side of the line and they need somebody who's going to be a road grader there. I'm hoping Mason McCormick is that guy. He was solid last year when he got hurt in the playoffs, or when he got hurt before the playoffs against the Ravens. That run game was not the same without him in there.
Yep. Good points all. As my last word on the running back thing, if Ashton Jeanty gets past 15, I would trade up for Ashton Jeanty, Andrew. He's going to sign himself off. We won't have to kick him off of the show at this point.
I could see the steam coming out of his ears as he's thinking about it.
Oh, he's gone. I didn't know if you could add
he's trying. Here it comes.
Okay, let's move on to the next one here. This is a fun question. Because one of the reports was that that Pickens, that the Patriots could have interest in Pickens. This was John Frischella again on X. If that's the case, Craig Worlow says, would you trade Pickens to the Pats for a second round pick and their young backup quarterback? I'll just throw this out there, Craig. If they managed to do that, that would be insane. I would take that deal, but there's no way that you're getting a second round pick and a quarterback of any kind, backup or not, in the same deal. I don't think you would need to lower that pick down to get the backup quarterback. You need to swap something else, I think. But I would not hate this deal if this happened. In fact, getting a second round pick plus the quarterback would be pretty thrilling. Corey, what do you think?
I mean, is it going to be the best deal that they get? I mean, getting a second, as we were talking about earlier, is going to be a pretty steep ask to begin with. Getting a second and a player, that's a lot. But if we were able to snatch that, especially off of the Patriots, I'm all for that.
Yeah. Andrew?
If you can get a 2026 third and the young quarterback, I would be totally fine with that. But I agree. I don't think that you can muster a second and Joe Milton. That'd be quite an ask. Yeah.
Okay. So
would you do straight up Milton for Pickens?
No. Not at all. I don't think
are we perceiving future value on both of them?
Yeah, right. I don't know.
Dude, George Pickens to Green Bay, so they have a proven receiver that can help them win now, for Malik Willis and Jair Alexander.
Okay.
You like Willis that much?
I mean,
why not?
Based on what he showed last year, I would take him over any quarterback not named Justin Fields.
Andrew will not give up the Malik Willis.
He was good last year.
Yes, but he was good for Matt LaFleur. Okay. There's 3 Matt LaFleurs in all of football.
True.
And Sam Darnold played for one of them last year, which is why I don't want any part of Sam Darnold personally. That Sam Darnold played for one of the best and most improvising minds in football right now. One of the better play callers, offensive designers, whatever you want to call it, in Kevin O'Connell last year. And thank you, Arthur Smith, for your contributions to NFL football, but I don't believe that's you personally. All right. Before we get to another question here, I want to ask a question. If you do trade George Pickens, what do you do from there at wide receiver? Just at wide receiver. I'm not talking about anything else. Because if you trade away George Pickens now, you're back to where you were just before you traded for Metcalf, where you've got a 1, but you don't have anything else behind him. So So what do you do, Andrew? What do you do at wide receiver if you trade George Pickens?
What I would do would be look at either a Dante Thornton or maybe a Jalen Royals if he slips a little bit on day 2, maybe early day 3. But I don't love the receiver class in general. I would still not be opposed to a guy like Amari Cooper at the right price. If the Steelers are trying to win now, he can help you win now. I think there's some names in the free agent market that maybe you could even wait on a little bit and get something there to be a number 2. I do think, though, this goes back to what Arthur Smith was like outside of the short time that he had both Corey Davis and A.J. Brown in Tennessee, is that most of his offenses have been run exclusively through one receiver that has been peppered with targets and targets and targets. We all thought that was going to be George Pickens this past year. And then there were just games he wasn't targeted like he needed to. So maybe DK is that guy that is truly that elite receiver that can get 12, 13 targets a game. In Arthur Smith's offense, you utilize the tight ends, and outside that, you're good to go. Maybe that's what the Steelers would see there. Or maybe Roman Wilson finally emerges. Maybe they believe in Roman Wilson more than the rest of us do. So I wouldn't be stunned if the Steelers made another move at receiver, but I don't think it would be as much a necessity, especially considering the fact that the Steelers do have Metcalf under contract beyond this year. You know you have someone long-term. It's not, if we don't sign someone this year, we're going to have a totally new wide receiver room next year if we don't bring George Pickens back.
Yeah. Corey?
I mean, if you can trade George Pickens for a 3, I say go get him. That'll return this room, like you said, right back to where it was. But there's an interesting thought maybe with their draft pick. Do they go Tyler Warren? Do they take the tight end out of Penn State with how versatile he is, lining up where he does? They could use him as a large X and really go after offenses. He provides a lot of versatility, just the way the Raiders tight end, I can't think, Bowers, the way the Bowers does for the Raiders, he could do the same thing for the Steelers. So that guy provides a lot of options and a lot of talent for you that you can really utilize. So there's options. I like that. And if you do go back to just having one major receiver, do they possibly go back to their thoughts of first round wide receiver? Do they go back to Emeka Egbuka? Do they take him in the first round? I wouldn't be opposed to that either. So they're going to have a lot of options if they trade George away. If they get a third out of it, now they've got 2/3. Do they package that with something? Package one of them, move back up into the second. I agree that they don't like to wait too long between their picks and their rounds, like you were saying earlier, Jeremy. And so I think that they're going to look for a way to recoup that second. I think that Pickens makes the most sense to do that.
If they move on from Pickens, I think they attack the high end of the free agency market to bring in a second guy. Amari Cooper would make sense. Andrew, you've talked about him a lot. He would make sense as a totally different receiver from DK Metcalf. And I don't think his price point is going to be really high at all after the year he had in Buffalo, but I still think he has something left in the tank. Maybe you could still go get a Chris Godwin. I think he might be out of your price range at this point. I don't know, but he would be another one of those guys that's just a totally different receiver. He would make sense. And then you have to draft one. I think you go back to double dipping at the free agency and the draft market. If you keep Pickens, I think you probably just draft somebody in the middle rounds and maybe sign a lower end free agent. Somebody mentioned on here, what about Darius Slayton? That's too many guys who do similar things. If you try to bring in Slayton, that's too many guys that run down the field straight and you throw the ball up in the air too.
So all Hail Marys every game.
Yeah,
Russell Wilson
all game. If it's not a handoff to Ashton Genty, who you traded up for, then it's a deep throw to DK Metcalf or George Pickens. All right, let's see here. We got some other questions. Let's get to this one we've talked about. Afton asks it. We want to get her question in here. Do Steelers target defensive line in the first round? Now, I think that's what they do. Defensive line. I think we're kind of all in agreement there that that's probably the way that they'll plan to go. If they do go that route, you guys have mentioned Kenneth Grant. I like Derek Harmon a lot in that spot.
Yeah.
Does anybody else interest you there? Walter Nolan or anybody else? Or if Mason Graham somehow starts to fall in this draft, Andrew, do you try to go up and get a Mason Graham?
I don't think he falls far enough for the Steelers to do it. I just don't see a scenario in which that happens. Jacksonville has a dire need along the defensive line. So it makes too much sense for them to take him there. I don't see him slipping outside the top 10. If he falls to maybe 12 or 13, I can't imagine a scenario in which he does. And I don't think he's a great schematic fit for the Steelers. He just doesn't have the measurables. I think the Steelers need beef along the inside, a guy that can take up space and keep the linebackers clean. That was a problem last year. So either you do that, or if you're going for the 5 technique, you bring in a guy like Harmon who has that length, or maybe you wait until the second and get a guy like Ty Robinson or someone along those lines. But if the Steelers want to truly scratch that itch along the defensive line like Philly has done for several years, I think it's Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon. I like Walter Nolan. I think he's a better fit for a 4-3 scheme. Personally, I think he's a better 3 technique. Doesn't have the length the Steelers look for. But again, a great athlete, great player. I think that Harmon or Grant would be the 2 guys, though, if the Steelers do go for that early.
Yeah, I agree. Corey?
I'm Kenneth Grant all the way if they choose to go defensive line in the first round. But there's also free agency option. Could they possibly bring back Javon Hargrave? He played pretty well for the Steelers when he was here. He just happened to get a better deal and left. We haven't really solved that tech position that Benton plays since Tuitt and Hargrave were there. So to find somebody who can, spell Benton, who's coming on strong, or even just really just solidify that defensive line with the depth that way. I think Hargrave's a good way to do that. He's a little undersized to play the nose tackle position. It'd be interesting to see what the Steelers would do for that. They've been, trotting out Montravius Adams and others, Larry Ogunjobi for a while, but nobody that really has locked that position down quite like Casey Hampton did, back in 2013. So can they go out and get somebody like that? Wilbar, is there somebody like that in the draft?
No, but you can just convince Aaron Donald to come out of retirement. That could solve some problems.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if is it Michael Pierce that's available in free agency, defensive lineman that played for the Ravens? Because he's the kind of nose tackle you're talking about there. But I think the closest thing to Big Snack is
Poona Ford's available, isn't he?
Poona Ford's available. I'm pretty sure you're right. I'm thinking of the guy for the Giants, Dexter Lawrence. He's kind of the closest thing to that in the NFL today. So, but you're not getting
trade for him too.
At all. Sure. Let's just trade for everybody. Here is a fantastic question from John S. Fantastic question. Been waiting to get to this one. Does the contract from Metcalf impact TJ Watt's extension? I'm going to say no, because the Steelers have a lot of cap space to work with. And I think that you lower your cap hit in 2025 probably by doing an extension with TJ Watt. So, Andrew, what do you think, though? Is this something that the Steelers can have both worlds? Can they have their TJ Watt, high-paid defensive player, and have a guy who just raked in the largest contract in Steelers history?
I think they can. Watt hasn't shown any signs of regression. I know his numbers went down a little bit this year, but I think that was more based on scheme than anything else.
Yes,
he's still playing at a high level. I think the Steelers would prioritize him.
Corey?
The Steelers are going to have to do some hard negotiating, because after seeing what Crosby came out with his guaranteed money, and then Myles Garrett and his guaranteed money, is Derek Watt, is TJ Watt going to press for, having the largest contract like everybody else has? Typically history would say no. TJ's been pretty fair with the franchise. Franchise has treated him well. And he's, I think the same thing's going to happen here. I don't think he's going to ask for top of the market money, but he's going to want that extension. He's going to want to feel that love. And, I think that the Steelers are willing to show him that love. So I think it's really just going to come down to the numbers and when it happens.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, there's a lot of things that have gone down now, with Myles Garrett signing his extension. Who was it? Trey Hendrickson's going to get traded probably at some point. It was Max Crosby who got a big contract for the Raiders. So that price just keeps going up. And that's the one thing we've been saying on our platforms, is that the Steelers need to get this done with TJ Watt before this keeps going up. But I mean, it already maxed out probably with with Myles Garrett.
Well,
the Steelers.
you were just talking about NFL sacks leader Trey Hendrickson. He's going to be on the market. What are they going to sign him to? So I think the Steelers need to get this done sooner rather than later to keep that price down.
And Micah Parsons is going to get a contract as well from the Cowboys or somebody. Somebody's going to try to bring in Micah Parsons. Could the Steelers trade TJ Watt and go get Micah Parsons? Now we're in crazy land here.
Well, one name I'll mention, if the Steelers are just looking to add depth and maybe not an immediate guy who's going to be a huge contributor, but a guy who started last year for the Raiders and actually did a really good job, I think would be an ideal fit for a 5-tech role, would be Adam Butler. I know he's on the plus side of 30, but he had 5 sacks last year, 6'5", 300 pounds. He fits the Steelers mold of a 5 technique, had 65 overall tackles last year, 8 tackles for loss, had 10 QB hits. He's a penetrator, and he grades out solid against the run too. And I mean, his age, he's not going to break the bank either. So he'd be a guy I guess I would keep my eye on, going back to that defensive line question.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. I'm trying to find another question that we can talk about. Okay. This one from Joseph was going to be my next question, so I want to talk about it now. What are your thoughts of Daniel Jones? Daniel Jones as the Steelers franchise quarterback. No, Daniel Jones is the Steelers quarterback in 2025. Honestly, I think he's going to be cheaper than Darnold would be. So I would take Daniel Jones over Sam Darnold. But I still would take Justin Fields before him. And I might even take Aaron Rodgers before Daniel Jones personally. But how do you guys feel about Daniel Jones, Andrew?
If the Steelers would have already traded away Minkah Fitzpatrick, not made this deal, and were going toward a rebuild, I think that would be an excellent option. For where the Steelers are at right now, I don't think it really makes sense. You don't make a move like this and then sign an inferior quarterback. Like I think we've seen enough of Daniel Jones to know what he is at this point. He's never going to be an elite quarterback. We kind of knew that coming out in the draft. I mean, he is getting compared to Eli Manning. I mean, Eli was never an elite quarterback. He got lucky on a couple postseason stretches, but really outside of that, was just decent quarterback. Daniel Jones is never going to be a great quarterback. I think he's a stopgap guy at this point. He's the quarterback you bring in if you want a relatively high draft pick, because guess where the Giants have been picking the last few years? Right up at the top. So I don't see Mike Tomlin ever signing Daniel Jones.
Okay. Corey?
I could see him signing Daniel Jones, but as a backup. That's the only way he's going to sign him.
Okay.
So, it could be
Josh Dobbs.
I'd bring back Josh Dobbs. I wouldn't mind that.
and with Fields, you don't have to switch the scheme if Fields were to go down. He plays the similar style to Josh Dobbs. You don't have to change the offense at all.
Right. And Josh has proven that he can absorb different offenses pretty quickly. So, I think a dude is pretty smart.
He was good in Minnesota just a year ago.
Yep.
What about Kirk Cousins, you guys? What are your thoughts on Kirk Cousins for this offense? Andrew?
I'd rather him than some of the other options because I think he's going to be relatively cheap compared to what he got last offseason. He wants to prove himself. If you're talking about one-year prove-it deal, I would rather that than Darnold. I'd rather that than Rodgers. But again, he's not a guy I think is going to beat a Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. But I think he'd be better than Russell Wilson or a guy. I think he's a guy that's going to at least win you games and make you competitive. He'll be consistent.
Regardless of who this is, they have to be a mobile quarterback. Whoever is the quarterback for the Steelers has to be a mobile quarterback. I mean, what we're seeing in the playoffs, what we're seeing out of NFL defenses these days, the speed that they're running at, you have to have some mobility. So that automatically, kills about 3 or 4 of these different options that we've been talking about. Aaron Rodgers right up front, having a Kirk Cousins with his Achilles, like that's a no-go for me. So I think that trying to go younger, trying to get more mobile, there really is only one quarterback on this list that makes any sense for the Steelers, and that is Justin Fields.
Yeah, we'll see if he becomes the guy. I think we're gonna know by the end of the first afternoon of legal tampering who the Steelers quarterback is. I think they're going to make a move on this quick. That is, unless the guys available are slow playing it to see how their market goes. But the longer you wait as a quarterback, or the longer you wait at any position group, we've seen it. It doesn't get better. It just gets worse because teams are going to fill things out. They're going to figure things out, and your services are going to become less and less valuable to team. So I think this happens very quickly tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised if You remember how fast the Mitchell Trubisky announcement was made a few years back? It was like 12:30 after the new league year started at noon. I think you're going to hear something pretty similarly along those lines to the Steelers adding a quarterback.
They went out and got Mitch Trubisky first move of
yeah,
free agency.
exactly.
So
Yep.
it's not unprecedented.
Yeah. Well, so who could they get this time? We'll see. My other thought here is there's other ways you can recoup that second round draft pick, and I don't think it has to be trading George Pickens. It could be trading Minkah. Corey, you mentioned Minkah a little bit ago, and it got me thinking about that. What if the Steelers are moving some of their spending to the offensive side of the ball, and Minkah Fitzpatrick becomes the guy that you let go here? And then maybe safety comes into play in that first round, like a Nick Emanwari, if he's available at 21, something like that. What do you guys think about the potential for that? Andrew, sorry.
I mean, Emanwari, I love the guy. I think that, he'd be more of a luxury pick at this point, but I wouldn't, again, if the Steelers were to make a move, say like with Minkah, and that opens up a safety spot, then I would go after a guy like Talanoa Hufanga, not just because he looks and plays kind of like Troy Polamalu, but he's a physical presence. And I think he would add that extra bit of physicality. I mean, the Steelers safeties, Deshaun Elliott was solid last year, but the Steelers safeties the past couple of years, and I would include Minkah in this, have not been the greatest tackling in the open field. Hufanga is a sure tackler. He comes downhill. He would help run support.
Corey?
I'm just not seeing Tomlin trading his favorite son. So I think I just think Fitzpatrick's going to ride his contract out, and Tomlin's going to let him. I think Tomlin and Fitzpatrick are tied at the hip throughout their career. So
sure. Let's see. Biggie Bronco says go after Zach Wilson. That he went through some quarterback rehab last year with Sean Payton. He was a second round pick. Maybe as the backup to somebody, and then see what happens, right, Andrew?
Yeah, I'd be okay with the backup, not starter.
Corey?
Yeah, I'm down with that too. Yeah.
Somebody in here said bring back Mason Rudolph.
No.
We have a super chat, so we'll bring that one up. Kenneth McNair Jr., thanks for the $1.99. Kenneth, we could trade back 10 spots and pick up second. Starts to be an option too. Maybe Kenneth Grant would be available closer to the back end of the first round after not testing. We'll see what he tests like at his pro day, see if that changed anything. But Andrew, you've been advocating for trading back in the first round for this team for years. Could this be the year they do it?
I'll believe it when I see it. But the fact that the Steelers don't have a second now, I would be okay with it. But again, even though the Steelers don't have that second, I'm still looking at next year's draft capital because it typically comes at a more discounted rate and it's a better class. So I'm okay with waiting a year. So if I'm the general manager, I don't care I don't have a second. I'll trade back all day. I'd be happy to. But give me your 2026 second instead of 2025.
Good stuff. Guys, this has been a lot of fun. Let's see if we've got anything else in here that we want to talk about. Oh, Andrew, here's your guy, Tyler Huntley.
Yes.
Tyler Huntley. As Justin Fields backup only, please. And that would make sense, but you could do that. And that would fall in line with Art Rooney's statement. You want to have two guys that can do the same thing, so you don't have to change up the offense. Let's get in a comment here from Big G. We were talking about what you do in the first round. Big G Sean Gurley says, hear me out. I wouldn't be mad if the Steelers took Tyler Booker, Alabama guard at 21. Our line would be really good with health. Booker's combine wasn't great. Andrew, we were talking about that. You didn't think that it would cost him as much as maybe I did. How would you feel about this pick?
I wouldn't hate it. I could see a scenario in which Tyler Booker is still gone by the time we get to pick 21. I wouldn't rule it out. I've heard rumors that a lot of NFL teams are still really high on Booker. His tape is phenomenal. So, and to me, at guard, athleticism isn't quite as big an issue. But I do think guard is one spot where you can get a solid player on day two. I don't know if Jonas Savaiinaea would make it all the way to the Steelers in the second round. But if you're talking about a road grader, you can put it right tackle who's got decent athleticism. Give me Jonas Savaiinaea, 6'4", 330 pounds. That guy is a mauler. And he can move. He can get to that second level, and he can even pull a little bit when you need him to. So I don't think he plays tackle in the NFL. He plays guard. He'd be an ideal option for me, and maybe on day 2 if he were to somehow fall to 51. I'd rather that than going first round.
Corey?
I mean, anything that we're doing to continue strengthening the offensive line, the depth of it is a win for me. I'm okay if they want to spend a first round pick on that. I'd be okay with Booker, but like Wilmar said, I don't know if he's going to be there. I think he's going to be gone early.
Okay. The last couple people that I saw this the other day, and now I can't think of who it was other than Kenyon Green was one of them. The last couple guys who were drafted along the interior offensive line that graded out athletically the way Tyler Booker does have not worked out very well in the NFL, but every player is different, and the tape is really, really good with this guy. So there's a chance that he's a hidden gem now because of some of the issues with the testing this offseason. Okay, so to close this thing out, we've been going for a while here, but to close this thing out, I'm going to go around the list here. Since free agency starts tomorrow, let's go ahead and let each of us give who we think, well, what our next move would be if you're the Steelers. What's your next move going to be? And then the first round draft pick as a guess at this point, projection. Andrew, we'll start with you. What do you think the next move for the Pittsburgh Steelers should be when free agency starts? And who's the first round pick going to be?
The first free agent signing the Steelers to have, I'm torn between two. I'm going to say Chase Young. Get an extra edge rusher in the door. I almost said Asante Samuel Jr., but I'm going to go with the defensive end here, bulk up the trenches, and then first round, I'm going to say, as of now, Kenneth Grant. I just had a mock draft that had Matthew Golden there, and I was hoping we could, exchange back and forth thoughts on the Steelers fix this week, but this, I think, has kind of thrown a ringer into that.
Sure. Okay, good stuff. Corey, what you got?
I think the next piece in the free agency is going to be a familiar face. I think they're actually going to go after Javon Hargrave to bulk up that defensive line. And in doing so, the next move is really going to depend on whether they trade Pickens or not for me. Because if they don't trade Pickens, then they've got a lot of freedom to use that first round pick and go a lot of different directions, which I would think that they would. If they keep Pickens, I think they go offensive line. If they trade Pickens, I think the only person that they've probably got their eye on right there at wide receiver would be Emeka Egbuka.
Sure. Andrew?
Was Andy Weidel in Philadelphia when the Eagles signed Javon Hargrave?
I've been trying to think about that, Andrew. I was thinking about that because when they offered him when he left Pittsburgh, I don't know if he was there or not.
Would have been because Weidel came in 2022, right?
To Pittsburgh.
So he was in Philly previously. That would have been, you count the year off, I think 2020 was, he was signed in 2020 by the Eagles. So now that you mention it, that does make a lot of sense because not only of his ties to Pittsburgh, but Andy Weidel may have had a part in bringing him to Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Okay, so for me, it's the quarterback. That's going to be their next move. It's the one that they've been pounding the table for, and I think that quarterback is going to be Justin Fields when it's all said and done. I would not be surprised if it's Sam Darnold at this point, but I'm going to say Justin Fields is their next move, and then their first-round pick. I'm going to bring it up with the super chat here because Claude Bishop is asking about it. If Harmon is there at 21, do you draft him? Absolutely, I do, and I think that's going to be the first-round pick for the Steelers. He is an absolute prototype for their fit, and I think that he's going to be their first-round pick if I had to pick today. So Justin Fields and then Derek Harmon as the first-round pick. I don't think they trade George Pickens. That's going to be my final prediction here. I don't think they do it. I think they let him ride out his contract, and we will see what happens. Any final thoughts, guys? Andrew, I'll let you go first here. And then Corey, final thoughts, plug anything you want to plug, and we'll sign off on this edition of the Q&A.
Check out the Draft Dynasty podcast. We'll have plenty of draft content over there. Keep checking out scouting reports at fansfirstsports.com, steelcurtainnetwork.com. We'll have them coming up all the way through the draft. Get through as many of them as we can. We'll have a final big board. We'll try to accumulate as much as we can for that. And obviously the mock drafts will keep coming as well. Just a continual dropping from a faucet until April 24th.
Corey?
Just going to be compiling more articles, going to be diving back into a lot more editing. I took a break there for a while, had some personal things come up, but now things are starting to come back together. So you're going to see a lot more of me. Got a new Twitter handle, X handle, whatever you want to call it. It's a lot easier to spell now than my last one. So as you can see on the screen, it's Steely_McPitt. It's a play on words for Stealing McBeam, our Steelers.
Love it.
Steelers mascot, the one that Hartman loves to hate.
Right on. I love Steely McBeam. Hartman, you leave him alone. Leave him alone, Jeff Hartman. That's my heart to heart to you, Jeff Hartman. All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. We always have great time on this show. Thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. We will talk to you next time here on the Steelers Q&A. Go Steelers.
Living a good life.